Spring mass system, broadly speaking, it treats the runner like a pogo stick. So when we run, we have enormously complex system of muscles, joints, limbs, all of these things. And a lot of times, especially when we do gait analysis or anything like that, we pinpoint on certain things that are going on. What's going on in your hips? What's going on in your knees? What's your ankle doing? Thinking of the runner as this spring mass system, it's kind of like you squint your eyes and the whole body really bounces along as a spring. So if you look at just the underlying physics of the runner as a blob moving along, they're the same physics essentially as a pogo stick, which is really cool. And what's really cool is that persists across the entire animal species. So all animals that run like this essentially organize their whole body to behave like a pogo stick. And so what that means is that the runner, when they, run along, they're actually running as a giant spring that hits the ground at an angle and compresses. And as it compresses and pivots over its point, it launches off. So it kind of bounces along like that. So we essentially orchestrate all of these complex characteristics of our body to function together as one giant spring. And so that's what the spring mass system does, is just studies the characteristics of you as one giant spring. So rather than looking at what one thing is doing, it's kind of a global assessment of your overall system level mechanics. And yeah, so what we found was that those elite level milers run basically as stiffer pogo sticks. We'd say like stiffer, more upright pogo sticks. And there are a couple, there are a lot of different ways that you can make your, improve your stiffness. And I think one of the interesting things about this for coaches, practitioners, I think there are two questions layered in there that you said of like, how do you assess runners as that? And then how do you maybe improve that? And I think that there is stiffness is again one of those things that there is a Goldilocks value. You can't be too stiff. If you're too stiff, you're just hopping up and down, or like you're going to be, you can't load your body enough. And if you're too soft or too compliant, you're going to be compressing way too much and you're going to be inefficient. And what's interesting is on either sides of those optimalities, there are actually different injury etiologies. So like if you're too stiff in your system, there have been, like really people with high stiffnesses, there are, associations with tendon injuries. People with really low stiffnesses, there are associations with like knee injuries. So really kind of operating on either sides of those, you don't want to go too far one way. But moving the dial is maybe kind of that magic thing that we might think of. And the idea of like running stiffer, it's not something that you can change consciously. And I would actually say for most things in running, you don't want to change things consciously, because our bodies, again, getting back to this complex system of things that are all moving at once, our bodies and our conscious system cannot grab one of those at any moment in time and manipulate it, because by the time you do that, it's already wanting to be on to the next thing and is at some other stage in the gait cycle. So what I would instead propose doing is, rather than trying to think of trying to being stiffer, is just doing the things that demand more efficient interaction with the ground. Because broadly speaking, somebody who runs as kind of a stiffer system will spend a little bit more time in the air and a little bit less time on the ground, like a given stride length or frequency. So it's really, the idea is like getting more efficient in your interaction with the ground. And so things that you can do to do that, incorporating some plyometric drills, that's a really good thing to do. Sprinting, most people don't sprint. But sprinting is, I would say sprinting is one of the best forms of like weight training. It's the only way you can fully recruit all of your hamstring muscles at once. You cannot do in a constrained Olympic style lift or in the gym, you cannot do to your hamstrings what you can do while you sprint. That being said, that makes it a very sharp sword that you need to be careful with. But I think most runners across all spectrums could benefit from peppering in small doses of much faster running than what they do. So some sprinting, good to do. Plyometric drills, if you can't sprint, starting with some plyometric drills is a good way to develop more efficient interactions with the ground. Hills are another fantastic way to develop some of that strength. So hill running, and that's another good way to develop some of that, that muscular strength and power without the absolute speed requirement of sprinting. So if somebody can't quite sprint, going up and down a hill is pretty good. And then finally, the other thing that's really important is running on different surfaces. A lot of times we think of running on softer surfaces like grass or roads as being good for injury prevention. And a lot of people equate that to like lessening the load on their body. I think running on softer surfaces is good for injury prevention, but not for that reason. Because actually, when we run on a softer surface, we have to put more force on our body because for every step, a lot of force is lost because of that softer surface. I suspect one of the reasons why it's beneficial is it forces us to modulate our body's stiffness. So when you run on the pavement and then switch to run on the roads, you adjust your body stiffness to maintain your vertical center of mass displacement. So you maintain a consistent displacement by modulating your body as a stiffer system. So when you run on a softer surface, you stiffen your body up. So I think that there's an element of that by forcing your body to globally change itself with different stiffnesses. And you can do the same thing with shoes as well. Different types of shoes could impose that on your body. So I think using different surfaces to basically make your body more stiff or more compliant is another thing that runners can do to, incorporate in their training. That was something I picked up reading something from Haile Gebrselassie. He said something to the effect of year round, he goes to the track twice a week to do hundreds in spikes, year round. Like basically 50 weeks out of the year, he's doing that. And that stuck with me. And then of course I hear Ron, tell me the same thing my freshman year when I got to the team at Michigan. And it's that idea of strides and sprints. They're not competition. I mean, they do make you better for competition, but they are very important for maintaining your overall health of your body as a running system. That was one of the things that in that paper with the ultramarathon runners we really pointed to, and this had been shown in laboratory studies before us. Runners, as we run faster, we take more steps per minute, and this notion of taking one step frequency, one cadence, 180 steps per minute across a range of speeds is just it goes against how our bodies run. So enforcing that across speeds is not correct. Moreover, enforcing that one number, this gets back to how, through this conversation, we've hit on so many different times of how runners have such unique mechanics that are distinct to themselves. Fred Wilt, he wrote kind of some seminal training texts in the 1950s and 60s. He likened gait to a fingerprint. I'm very much of the same thing. I think all runners have a fingerprint, and that's what their gait is. Your cadence is the same thing. Every runner has a cadence that is optimal for him or her. So enforcing one on somebody is not correct. Moreover, enforcing it across a range of speeds is also not correct. So every runner has one that's optimal for him or her. Now, and that's, we showed that in the sub 4 paper as well, same thing where, what was actually really interesting in the sub 4 paper is those two groups, the sub 4, the elite milers and the good milers, across all the speeds on average, they had the same cadences and the same stride lengths. They just had different, again, interactions with the ground and the air within those stride lengths and speeds. But in both groups, they increased across speeds. Now, what was I saying? Oh yeah. So to the question of, should we change somebody's cadence or enforce something? Say, if you want to perform optimally, do not think at all about your cadence. Like, don't try and change that to run faster. Now, if you're thinking about it from injury standpoints, there are a couple things you can play around with. I like to think of manipulating your cadence as no different than manipulating your speed or like hills, or changing your cadence is very much like a drill. So it's not necessarily bad to do per se, but it is not something that you should say like, okay, today for my 30-minute run or my hour-long run, I'm going to go and try and run at this cadence. Or there is a notion of a good or bad cadence. There's not a good or bad cadence. For most runners, after you've run for a few months, you've ironed out a pretty good cadence for you. Changing your cadence, treat that like a drill. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing to do. That's a good, shifts up your neuromuscular recruitment, changes things very much like sprinting. So if you say, okay, now for the next 10 minutes, I'm going to go minute on, minute off of running 20 steps per minute higher than I normally would run. It's not going to help you run faster. Moreover, one of the interesting things when you tell somebody to do that, like out in the wild, they'll probably just run faster and be like, oh yeah, I increased my cadence and it was great. And I was running faster. It's like, well, yeah, no, you ran faster, which demanded that you increased your cadence. Another thing. But the way you can play around with that by maintaining speed is, by doing it on a treadmill or something like that in the gym. So if you guys have in your clinic a treadmill and you say like, okay, now for the next minute, we're going to bump up your cadence 20 steps per minute or 10 steps per minute. Do that 5 times or 10 times. It's a good exercise. It's a good training tool. And what that might end up doing is force them to change up their body stiffness or change up their system so that they're interacting with the ground a little bit differently. And where that winds them up doesn't mean that 20 steps per minute is going to be their new optimal. You're not going to move towards that. Maybe they run a few, steps per minute higher, or maybe they don't change their cadence at all, but they might have a lower ground contact time and they might have a stiffer body system or something like that. So it's one of those things that perturbs the system. And then when you go back and take it away, or rather take it away after doing it for 4 weeks or 6 weeks or something like that as an exercise, where they land and where they've kind of changed might be a little bit better. Because we have seen that having people shift the cadence like that is beneficial for some injuries. So like increasing cadence for like knee injuries, I think there is some evidence that running with a little bit higher injury is an easy way. It's a way that's been shown to kind of alleviate some of the stress on people that are suffering from patellar tendonitis or something like that. So it is a way to kind of mitigate some injuries that might be hampering people, but it's not a performance strategy. I would say use it like a drill and throw out the notion of a good cadence or a bad cadence.